Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. There's something unsettling about the wilderness. Out there, away from the city lights and familiar sounds, the world feels different. The trees stretch higher, the shadows grow darker, and the silence isn't really silence at all. Most often, people go into the woods anticipating adventure, solitude, a brush with nature's beauty, but some come back with stories that don't fit within the world we know. Time bends, memories fracture, and things that shouldn't exist watch from the tree line. Is it just the mind filling in the gaps where the unknown lurks? Or is something out there, waiting for the moment you step too far, wander too deep, maybe even find yourself in a place that wasn't meant to be found? Tonight we dive into those deep woods and isolated places. We go where the unfamiliar and the unknown feel just a little too close, all from the safety of our home. So, let's get started, shall we? I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota, the kind of place where the woods start right at the edge of your backyard and stretch on forever. My family wasn't big on technology, so my childhood was mostly spent outside, building forts, climbing trees, and running wild until the sun went down. I was about 10 when my dad decided I was old enough for my first solo camping trip. Not far, just past the creek behind our house, maybe a mile or two in. I'd camped plenty of times before with him and my older brothers, but this was a test, a way to prove I could handle myself. He helped me pack a small tent, a sleeping bag, and just enough food for a night. I wasn't scared. If anything, I was excited. I remember hiking in with no trouble, picking a spot in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. The trees were thick enough to block most of the sky, but there was still enough moonlight filtering through that I could see without a flashlight. I set up camp, ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and crawled into my sleeping bag feeling pretty proud of myself. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not to a sound exactly, more like the absence of sound. The woods are never quiet, not even at night. There's always crickets, owls, rustling of leaves in the wind, but when I opened my eyes, it was dead silent. But then I heard something. I heard someone breathing. It creeped me out because it didn't sound particularly close, but it wasn't far away either. Why could I hear it? Somewhere in the trees, just beyond my line of sight, was something making slow, deliberate inhales and exhales, like whatever it was wanted to be heard. My first thought was a bear. My dad had told me what to do in that situation. Stay still, don't make sudden movements, let it pass. But then, between those heavy breaths, I heard something else. A voice. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but clear enough that I could make out the words. I see you. Every hair on my body stood up. I don't know how long I lay there, barely breathing, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. I told myself it's gotta be the wind, maybe even a dream, so I pinched myself. But then, just as I started to believe it could be a dream, the voice came again, closer. Come out now. I shot up, heart pounding so hard I thought that I might shake the tent. I wanted to run, but Every part of me screamed, "Don't move." The zipper on my tent was just inches away, but I couldn't bring myself to reach for it. Then the breathing stopped, and the forest came back to life. Crickets, wind, the distant hoot of an owl, like someone had just flipped a switch. I sat there, frozen, until the first hint of dawn crept through the trees. Only then did I finally gather the courage to unzip the tent and step outside. Nothing was there. No footprints, no broken branches, just the woods, looking the same as they always had. I packed up my things and hiked back home without stopping once. My dad asked how it went. I told him it was fine. I asked him if he'd paid me a visit. He looked at me, confused. I never mentioned the voice. I still don't know what I heard that night. I have spent plenty of time in the woods since then, but I've never camped alone again. Sometimes even now, when I wake up in the middle of the night, if it's silent, it's eerie to me. I need noise. I just think about the slow, deliberate breathing just outside my tent. I used to work for a small outfitter company in Montana, leading backpacking trips deep into the wilderness. It wasn't a bad gig, long days, good pay, and I got to spend weeks at a time out in nature. But there's one trip I still can't explain, no matter how many times I go over it in my head. It was a 6-day trek, just me and a father with his 2 teenage sons. They were city folks, not used to the wilderness, but they caught on quickly. By the 4th night, we were miles from anywhere, camped near a glacial lake with nothing but trees, mountains, and silence around us. The fire was dying down when I told them to hit the sack. We would have a long hike ahead of us. I stayed up a bit longer, making sure our food was properly hung before heading to my own tent. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to footsteps outside my tent, not the quick, nervous movements of an animal. Someone was walking around our camp. I reached for my knife and listened. The footsteps circled our camp, slow and steady. I unzipped my tent as quietly as I possibly could and peeked out. The fire was just embers now, casting a weak glow over the trees. I didn't see anyone, but the footsteps were there, moving. I whispered the father's name. No answer. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, nothing. Just the sound of the wind through the trees. Then, from the darkness, something whistled. 3 notes. High, low, high. It echoed through the trees. I remember gripping my knife so tight, my hand actually hurt. After a minute, the footsteps started again, this time moving away from our camp. The whistle came once more, farther now, before everything went silent. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I checked the perimeter, looking for tracks. The ground was soft, plenty of footprints, but only ours. A few miles into our hike that morning, the youngest kid asked if I'd heard it. "The whistling," he said. I just nodded. His dad asked what he was talking about, and the kid said, "It was weird. It sounded just like Uncle Mike." I stopped walking. "Uncle Mike?" "Yeah," he said. "The whistle. That's the one that he used to call us inside for dinner." I didn't know what to say, and his dad went pale. "Mike's been dead for 5 years," he muttered. We hiked a little faster after that. I grew up in Oregon, and if you've ever spent time in the thick of its forests, you know how easy it is to lose yourself in them. It's not just the trees, though they're dense enough to swallow the sun. It's the way the land itself seems to shift, how familiar trails suddenly feel foreign, how silence settles in like a living thing. I was 16 the summer that it happened. My best friend Jay and I had hiked out to a secluded lake, deep in the woods near the Three Sisters Wilderness. It wasn't an official campsite, just a spot that we'd heard about from Jay's older brother, a hidden gem, he called it. We figured we'd spend the night out there, away from everything. No cell service, no noise, just the lake, the trees, and the two of us. I recall it being basically a perfect day, warm but not too hot, the kind of Oregon summer afternoon where the air smells like pine and earth, but you're not really breaking a sweat, where the water is so still it looks like glass. And that's where we decided to set up camp, swam in the lake, built a small fire as the sun went down. And then that's when things got strange. It started with the sounds, a low hum like distant machinery vibrating through the trees. Jay noticed it first. "You hear that?" he asked. His voice was hushed. I did hear it, but it wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, a pressure in the air that made my skin prickle. We tried to laugh it off and chalk it up to some weird natural phenomena. And then the woods went silent. Everything stopped. Just an unnatural, suffocating stillness. And then the lights appeared, not in the sky like a plane or a star, but in the trees. Small, flickering orbs, pale, bluish white, weaving between the trunks like fireflies, but moving with intent, intelligence. Jay grabbed my arm. "Dude, we gotta go." I was about to agree when I noticed something even worse. The fire. We'd built it up just moments ago, fed it dry wood, watched it crackle and spit embers into the night. But now, it was nothing but a pile of cold ash, like it had burned out hours ago. That's when the fear hit. We grabbed our packs, doused the remnants of the fire, though there was nothing left to put out, and we took off. The trail back should have been easy to follow. We'd marked trees, left a few clues to guide our way, but none of it was there. The path twisted in ways that it hadn't before. Trees we didn't recognize pressing in on all sides. The humming sound returned, louder now, buzzing behind our ears. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it was morning. We were standing on the side of the dirt road, less than a mile from where we'd parked. The sun was up, the birds were singing, and Jay was shaking, staring at his phone. It was Sunday. We'd left for the lake on Friday. An entire day and a half gone. We never really talked about it after that, not really. What was there to say? People disappear in the woods all the time. Some come back, some don't. I guess we were lucky. At least I think we were. But there's still something so unsettling about losing time. Time you'll never get back, and time that you can't really explain. A few years ago, I took a solo camping trip to Joshua Tree. I wanted to clear my head and spend a night under the stars, maybe take some long exposure shots of the Milky Way. I'd been to the park a few times before, but never alone. I didn't feel like it was the kind of place that you should be by yourself. Something about the land felt too old, too aware. But there I was. I set up my camp in a secluded area, away from the main roads, just me, my tent, and the expanse of boulders stretching in every direction. It was beautiful in the way that only a desert can be, silent, endless, untouched. That first night I was sitting by the fire when I heard something. A sound carried in the wind, low and distant, almost like a voice. It wasn't words exactly, more like a hum or a chant rolling through the rocks. I turned off my lantern, listening. The fire crackled, but beyond that, nothing. Just the desert breathing. I chalked it up to the wind playing tricks and went to bed. At some point in the night, I was uncomfortable. I woke up. No noise, no reason, but I had that feeling like someone was standing outside my tent. I stayed still, listening. Then, crunch. Footsteps. I reached for my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moon was bright, casting deep shadows against the boulders. But there was nothing. The feeling, though, it remained. Not just watched. I was being studied. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I decided to do a short hike before heading out. There was a rock formation a little ways from camp. It looked like a good spot to climb, maybe get some photos. As I walked, I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision. Light flashes of something darting between the rocks. Every time I turned my head, there was nothing. And then I found the carvings. They were deep into the stone, spirals and symbols worn down by time, but unmistakable. They weren't the type of symbols that you'd see on marked trails. These felt wrong, too sharp, too fresh. A gust of wind rushed past me, carrying the same hum from the night before. Only now it was closer to me. I turned, and just for a second, I saw something standing between the rocks. Tall, thin, its body blending into the stone, like it was part of it. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't stick around to investigate. I walked and then ran back to camp, packed up, and left. I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the desert heat was messing with me, but as I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and for the briefest moment, I swear I could see something standing there again. Either way, that feeling, I didn't like it. I haven't had that same feeling at that park before, so I'm glad I got out of there. When I was about 8 years old, my little brother and I got lost in the woods outside my family's property in Oregon. We didn't know we were lost, but everyone else seemed to. So, from the top. My grandparents used to own a cabin somewhere in or around Bend, Oregon. They sold it shortly after this event, so I still have no idea if it was because of this or simply a financial decision they had to make. Either way, I remember the home quite fondly. It had an immaculate garden, thanks to Grandma. Lots of area to run around and be free. There were some woods lining the property, stretching on for who knows how long. We weren't to go that far. My grandparents had a lassie-like dog named Tapper, who would play with my brother and I for hours, but he also acted much like a babysitter. I guess Lassie's character wasn't too far off, because Tapper was known to alert the adults when the children had wandered a bit too far. But he also had saved my grandpa, who'd gotten himself stuck in a mole hole. He'd snapped his ankle and wouldn't have been able to make it out if Tapper hadn't run home to alert Grandma. Anyway, good dog. Well, too often my little brother and I would wander just past the property and into the woods. We never did get that far with Tapper around, but on this particular day, Tapper was the one at the tree line. We thought, oh wow, Tapper boy wants an adventure too. Let's follow him. So we did. As we approached the trees, I remember Tapper disappearing into the woods, and we had to run in just to catch up with him. Once inside, though, we couldn't find Tapper. We called for him with no response. That was incredibly unusual, but like most 8-year-olds, I didn't think too much of it. We just kept on walking to find Tapper. We walked for what couldn't have been more than 30 seconds, when suddenly I got the feeling like I was in a lot of trouble. I couldn't figure out why I felt like this. I looked at my little brother, and he was just wandering off. I ran after him, grabbed his hand, told him, "I think we gotta go back now." He looked at me and said, "Nuh-uh, Mama's here. She's calling for us." Then he let go of my hand and kept running off in the opposite direction. I followed after him, not because I could hear what he heard, but because I didn't want to lose my brother. Catching up with him, I grabbed him a little more firmly and said, "We gotta go. Mama's not here." But just as I grabbed him and I looked forward, I saw Tapper. Then I heard a bark, but it didn't come from the Tapper that we were looking at. It came from the Tapper behind us, at the edge of the woods, right where we had entered. Still, my brother insisted Mama was in the woods, that she was looking for us, and even still, I heard nothing outside of Tapper's barking. The other Tapper sat patiently in front of us, nodding his head in a most unusual way. I knew this wasn't Tapper, but I had no idea what it was. I calmly told my brother that we needed to get out of here and we needed to get away from this dog. "What dog?" he asked me almost in a giggle way. When I pointed at the dog, it started to snarl. It was quick and loud, so I recoiled, but my brother did not. He just stood there, looking at me, confused as to why I was shaken, and still asking me, "What dog?" He clearly didn't see what I saw, and I couldn't hear what he heard, but we needed to move. I was bigger than him, so I just scooped him up, giving him no chance to go in the other direction. I ran us towards the real Tapper, leaving the wannabe behind us. I didn't look back. When we got within a footstep of Tapper, I realized we weren't exiting the same area that we'd entered, but I was relieved to be exiting. Once we did, we heard an uproar of voices coming from our right. It was our entire family. Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa. They were a mix of emotions. After reprimanding us for going into the woods, they asked why we didn't respond to them calling for us. I told them I didn't hear any of that. My brother says he heard Mama calling for him. So then it just looked like I wasn't paying attention or answering, but I swore. And I swear to this day, I absolutely did not hear that. Even with all of that considered, how did we end up on the entire other side of the woods? We didn't walk nearly long enough to cover such distance, but that's where it gets weirder. Everyone is talking about how long we were gone for, over an hour. There's just no way that could be true. There's no way we were gone for longer than 10 minutes. I double know this because when I was a child, time always crawled. I was constantly being told to be patient or go entertain myself to pass time. I just knew that we weren't gone for that long. Anyway, I never told anyone about the dog because it didn't seem like they believed much I had to say for myself anyway. Even now, I remember how isolating that felt, to not be believed. I wasn't a child known for fibbing, but I guess as I've grown, I get it. The events that unfolded were impossible. I saw and felt something completely different than my brother, but neither of us thought that we were gone longer than a couple minutes. I can't explain it, so how could they? I don't know. I do know there's something so unsettling about those woods. was 19 when I finally escaped my parents' constraints, spread my wings, and left the nest. I was terrified. My parents weren't monsters, and they would have let me stay there forever if I wanted. But that's the reason I had to go, you know? I easily could have stayed living in the little mother-in-law apartment downstairs, but I felt my spirit start to wither. Born and raised in the same small coastal town, there's almost a nostalgic feeling to think that you could live like this forever. The population rarely changes through generations. Teachers could recall the antics they witnessed from the parents of my classmates when they taught them years ago. Summer jobs become careers, and you become a manager of a group of kids trying to earn money for school clothes. Simple routines lacking urgency or accomplishment. Those adorable anchors my friends called babies, it wasn't for me. So first chance I got, I split like a cheap pair of pants, albeit my chance arrived in the form of my aunt destroying her hips, falling down the wooden staircase in her home. Her name was Colleen. She was my mom's older sister that lived alone in a secluded wooded area in New England. From what I'd known about Colleen, she'd burnt every bridge with every other family member she had, but the sisterly bond that she shared with my mom never dissolved. My parents loved Colleen, and so did I, but they both had jobs and couldn't take time off of work to care for her, so I volunteered. In a tragic turn of circumstances, the week after I arrived, Colleen would pass away in her sleep from a brain aneurysm. Instead of taking on the responsibility of getting the house ready to sell, my mom proposed that they take over the deed to the house. I think my mom was excited at the prospect of having the house all to themselves again, as when I came home the first time after Colleen's passing, half of my bedroom had already been packed up. The following weekend, all three of us drove back up to New England to pick up Colleen's ashes and unpack my belongings into the big empty house. I didn't have much when it came to belongings. Everything I owned could fit in the coat closet by the front door. The house was already furnished with frivolous high-end products my lonely aunt would order from her catalogs. The neighborhood was quiet, safe community with a good school district. This was a fact I remember my dad telling me as we set down the last box from the moving truck. It wasn't a big deal, but I was under the impression that we were all going to go out to dinner when we were done unpacking. But instead, my dad says that stuff about the school district and then goes, "So, you're good here, right?" I replied in confident agreeance. I did heavily reflect upon why they were so elated for me to go. Could I have been that annoying? Have they only been nice to me for these 19 years because they were obligated to as my parents? No, they wanted to smoke pot. I never knew they were drug bugs, and apparently they weren't for 19 years, but as soon as I leave, they get hooked on the stuff again. So there I was, alone for the first night in this house. I didn't do much, unpacked a little, found a frozen lasagna buried in the freezer that didn't look horrible. I ate it on the couch while watching some terrible reality show, one that Colleen had probably recorded years ago. The place still smelled like her perfume, a powdery floral scent. It reminded me of department store makeup counters. It was strange being there without her. Not necessarily bad, just quiet. Maybe it was too quiet. By midnight, I was getting ready for bed, and I realized I hadn't locked the back door. The house had a sprawling backyard that bled into the woods, and though the town was safe, my mom had drilled into me that unlocked doors were an invitation for trouble. So I patted down the kitchen, flipped on the light, and checked the deadbolt. Locked. I frowned. I swore I hadn't touched it earlier, but I must have. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, leaning against the counter as I stared out the window above the sink. The backyard was pitch black, the porch light barely illuminating the first few feet of grass before the trees swallowed the rest. The woods were so much darker here than back home on the coast. Less sky, no streetlights. just a wall of blackness stretching endlessly beyond the house. I was about to turn away when something moved. A shadow just past the porch. I caught my breath. I squinted, trying to see through the darkness. It had been quick, just a flicker of movement against the trees. An animal? Trick of the light? What light? I thought. Then something moved past the window. I jerked back so fast I nearly dropped my glass. A figure, tall, broad-shouldered, had moved along the side of the house. No flashlight, no sound, just a slow, deliberate stride. My stomach turned to ice. It wasn't my parents. They wouldn't be back until the morning. No neighbors, no expected visitors. Someone was out there. My heart was pounding as I rushed through the house, checking all the doors, flipping off as many lights as I could. I didn't want to see whatever was out there, and I sure as hell didn't want it to see me. But curiosity got the best of me. I crept back toward the kitchen, keeping low, peering out the window at an angle. The yard was still, empty. Maybe I'd imagined it. Then the porch light flickered. For a split second, I saw something at the edge of the yard. Not a person, something else. It was tall, wrong, its arms hanging far too low, its shoulders unnaturally high, its legs bending oddly, like they weren't jointed correctly. And though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was looking at me. The second the light cut out completely, I ducked below the counter. My pulse was hammering in my ears. The house felt impossibly big all of a sudden. Too many windows, too many ways for it to see me. I needed to close the blinds. I moved as fast as I could, yanking down the shades in the kitchen, then the living room, the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly, I fumbled the last one, the cord tangling in my fingers as I struggled to pull it down. And then I heard it, a deep, rhythmic clicking. It came from just outside the glass door. I went still. I practically stopped breathing. The sound I heard wasn't human. It was deliberate, patterned, like a language I didn't understand. I forced myself to move, to shut the last blind, sealing myself in darkness. I stayed crouched on the floor for what felt like hours, barely breathing, waiting for some sound, some sign that it was gone. But the night stretched on, silent, except for the occasional creak of the house settling. Just when I thought it would be safe to move, I'd hear that clicking sound. So I stayed put. And apparently I stayed put for hours, because eventually headlights swept across the driveway. My parents were back. I ran outside to meet them, nearly barreling into my dad. I told them everything about the shadow, the clicking, the way it moved. My dad sighed, rubbing his face. He told me it was probably a deer, maybe an owl. My mom said that I had been alone too long, and my nerves were getting the best of me. They really didn't understand. That night, I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that they were right, that all of it had been my imagination, a trick of the light, an overactive mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't those things, because as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I swore I heard it again, the same slow, deliberate clicking, somewhere beyond my walls. When it didn't happen for a few days, I decided I was safe, that whatever it was had decided to move on. This was over 4 years ago, and though I've settled into the house quite nicely, I do constantly wonder if and when I'll hear that clicking again. And as much as I don't think I want to know, I still wonder What was it? Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night, and keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. And of course, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members: Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, T. COLTDADDY Eagle, Mallory Dominguez, KARI WATKINS, PILAR TREDEN WIXSON, Larry Hill, Ripley, JoJo Starcher, Mary Patrick, Debbie Lafreniere, and Julie Bordelais. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Mary H, Tanya F, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Tony P, Lissane, Arlene F, Adrian, TF Parham, Jason G, and Lori T. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or become a channel member. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.